We've got a healthy number in the room, so we're going to get started. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director of the Episcopal Parish Network, and we are very pleased to welcome you today to this session on voting faithfully. We are honored to partner with our friends in the Office of Government Relations and to bring you our panelists for a lively conversation about voting and civic engagement in this election season. An important topic that hopefully you can share with your congregation, either the recording of this video or the thoughts that you garner from it. So welcome. We're glad to have you here, and we are so pleased to have all of our panelists here with us today. It's great to have the presiding bishop with us. He was to be with us in Houston, but unfortunately that didn't take place this last March. So it's wonderful to have you here, presiding bishop. Thank you for taking time out of your day, along with all of our other panelists who are sharing their wisdom and their thoughts. So without anything else from me, please enjoy this conversation, and thank you. Off to Alan.
Thank you, Joe. It's really grateful to collaborate with the Episcopal Parish Network for this program as a part of our Vote Faithfully election engagement campaign. I'm Alan Yarborough with the Office of Government Relations. This is part of the presiding bishop staff. We're tasked primarily with representing the church's policy positions to the U.S. federal government and building collaborative relationships with government officials to help address problems in our communities through better policy and legislation. But within that, part of our work involves leading the nonpartisan Vote Faithfully election engagement work. And I am very pleased and honored to be here with our distinguished guests today, each with a slightly different angle and structure to their portion of the program, but I hope all of them will help illuminate the reasons why churches and Episcopalians should not only be voting, but to help get out the vote and to showcase some of the creative ways the church is already doing this. It's an opportunity, I think, to celebrate election engagement and really ground the practice in our faith. I just want to acknowledge, or think it may be helpful to acknowledge, of course, that we are experiencing an increasingly high level of stress and anxiety around this year's election from a number of sources. Responding to this moment is challenging, and with escalating levels of violence and violent rhetoric, leading to concerns around poll workers, election office staff, candidate safety, voter safety, and more. But we hope that the program today, again, and the resources you'll learn about will help you prepare for this, navigate the coming months, and really leverage our relationships in our communities to build better habits of healthy faith-based civic engagement. So we'll have time again for questions in the program, so please make use of that. But I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Presiding Bishop Michael Curry. Bishop Curry, it's a pleasure to work with you across a number of issues, but specifically for this program today, really grateful that you are here.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you to everybody who's on this panel. I thought I would just say a few things that would tee up this conversation, both biblically and theologically. And I suspect that the passage that I'm going to suggest as potentially helpful is not one that we think of as normally helpful. It's from Paul's letter to the Romans in chapters 12, 13, and 14. And that passage has often been misused. That section has often been misused for maintenance of the status quo. And yet when you look at it carefully, you'll discern that, wait a minute, Paul was getting at something considerably different and significant. In those 3 chapters, Paul weaves in the command and the commitment to love the neighbor with the commitment to be a citizen of the polis. Mm-hmm. He actually weaves those two. He doesn't leave our engagement with the civil government just hanging there. We have an obligation as followers of Jesus to participate in the life of the civil society, and he's very clear about that. And yet he grounds our participation in a he grounds it in the commitment to love the neighbor as yourself. If you look at, I mean, you don't have Bible's in front of you, but if you look at chapter 13, it begins, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, and there is no authority except from God. Now, people read that and stop there. But then if you read further, listen to what he says. For the reason you also pay taxes, for the authorities of God's servants busy with this very thing, pay to all what is due them, taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due. And everything stops there. But then listen to what he says next. Go no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the whole law of God. That is where Paul injects the commitment to love the neighbor, to seek the good and the welfare and the well-being of the other as well as the self, as part of our participation as Christians in the civil polis. And that's a struggle that is often missed in this passage from Paul. It is Paul saying we must participate in the life of the polis, but we participate from an angle of vision, not an angle of selfishness, not language of self-centeredness, but from an angle of what does it mean to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Our participation in the polis is the parable of the Good Samaritan. Love your neighbor as yourself. Our participation in the civil polis is Matthew 25, the parable of the Good Samaritan. As you did it to the least of these who are members of my family, you have done it unto me. Our participation in the civil polis, if you will, is to love the neighbor as the self. And that's not about buying, that's not buying politics. That's not a particular, that's not whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. That's, you've got to participate in the polis and do it as best we can, living out what it means to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that's where things like the Good Samaritan come to play in our participation in the life of the polis.
Thank you, Bishop Curry, for that grounding, that reflection. And I think it does, set us up very well to hear from our next speakers. So I'll turn next to Willie Bennett. He's the Senior Congregational Engagement Officer at the Episcopal Health Foundation in Houston, Texas, and to Joyce Statz, who's the Health and Justice Advocacy Network, or HJAN, representative from St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in Austin, Texas. So Willie and Joyce, it's great to have you both here with us today.
Thank you. Great to be with you. Thank you so much, Bishop Curry. You teed us up perfectly for what we're going to share about the work of the Episcopal Health Foundation and the work of the Health and Justice Advocacy Network. If we could cue the slides. My name again is Willie Bennett. I'm a Senior Congregational Engagement Officer with the Episcopal Health Foundation. EHF is a foundation that's fairly new and young as foundations go, based in Houston. We believe all Texans deserve to live a healthy life, especially those that face the biggest barriers to good health. And our goal is to change the conversation on health and reshape the debate around healthcare to focus on addressing the non-medical or root causes of poor health. Through the foundation, we're providing millions of dollars in grants. We work with congregations, community partners, provide important research. And all that is to support solutions that address the underlying causes of poor health. We have a slogan in the Episcopal Health Foundation: health, not just healthcare. We want people to have health, not just healthcare. Next slide, please. And so in my area, I get to do what I think is the fun work. I get to work with congregations. It is a privilege. And we have 4 focus areas: mental health, poverty alleviation, racial justice, and civic engagement, which is highlighted today. Next slide. So with this, we've done many things over the years, and with the creation of the Health and Justice Advocacy Network, which we helped create, it has really turbocharged the work that we have done in and around loving our neighbor, making things better for Texans with their health, community by community, through congregations doing outward-facing work. Working with HJAN through the voting challenge, trainings, working to co-create and partner the expansion of the Health and Justice Advocacy Network, focusing on also things that deal with poverty alleviation, partnering with other groups that work on hunger, all of those things. But specifically today, we're highlighting the work with civic engagement and the creation of HJAM, which came out of work on the census that I was doing with congregations. And when everything went COVID, we immediately pivoted to online, just like you guys did with EPN. And our churches took to it like a duck to water. And the work of HJAM was born out of the work to engage folks around the census. And we asked, are you interested in policy work in addition to what we did with the census? And folks said yes, and that's how HJAM was created. I'll turn it over to you, Josh.
Okay, so then if you would move to my set of slides, we'll talk a little bit about what they wrought in getting HJAM going. So
only the first step is free.
So if you would run the HJAM slides, please. Okay, so we are a group building advocacy and justice within our churches, within our community. Next slide, please. We see ourselves as a network of Episcopalians who are living out their baptismal covenant. We are Episcopalians throughout the Diocese of Texas. Some are clergy, some are lay, collaborating together and advocating in the legislature, in society, for health and for justice. We were born in 2020, and out of the work many of us were doing around the census, we got involved with issues on Medicaid expansion in Texas. And so during the legislative sessions, which are every 2 years, we've been focused on getting work done that improves access to healthcare. In 2021, we got about 28 congregations involved. And though we were in COVID, we used postcards, we used phone calls, whatever we could, made about 600 contacts with our legislators. And then in 2023, we added a focus day at the Capitol, where a group of us met together and planned our day of visiting with legislators. And again, focusing on healthcare, focusing on maternal health care, which has been too little in Texas. And we were able to get that coverage raised from 2 months to 12 months after the birth of the child. Next slide, please. In the even number years, like this year, we're focused on getting out the vote. And so we used the Vote Faithfully materials that come from the Office of Government Relations and added to it something that put a little bit of fun into the activity, a voting challenge. So we were challenging each of the churches in the diocese to get as many voters out as they could. And we would be helping them in the challenge by having them track how many people they got to vote, giving out prizes. Ice cream socials seem to be a good, healthy way to go after it. So individual congregations then did their own tracking, reported their results. We awarded prizes for the parish with the most voters and the parish with the highest percentage voting, because we have parishes that vary in size from dozens to hundreds. And so to make it fair, we had prizes on each end. In addition, individual parishes did other things to promote the vote. For example, voter registration in the church lobby on Sundays. And some of the churches provided their facilities as polling sites. So we've done a number of things to encourage the vote. Next slide, please, shows one of the posters that was in the lobby of our church, tracking people's vote during the voting challenge. And that visual reminder, I think, was helpful in getting people to get out to vote. Next slide, please. So this year we added another thing to our collection. We did a book study in July that was around a book about being a faithful citizen, Bishop Andy Doyle's book called Citizen. He launched that book study and we had a lot of people in attendance. It was followed by 4 weeks of study and discussion sessions at 2 different times of day. And again, we drew a lot of people to that. So it gave us a basis for everybody to be thinking about what it means to be a Christian citizen, Christian first, citizen next in our country. Last week, we launched the voting challenge for this year. It's essentially what we did in 2022 with encouraging videos from our team and from our bishops, and an opportunity for people to do videos and try to win prizes as the best video, and again, trying to get prizes for getting out the most votes. We've added 2 other things this year. The day after Election Day, we know there will be people disappointed one way or the other, but we need to focus on hope for the future. And so we're adding the day of hope, the day after Election Day, and our bishop will be leading a prayer service, and parishes are encouraged to do other activities in community. Following that, for the next week, we're focused on a week of service. And again, this is getting people to think about what we can do as Christians within our community to promote community, to promote harmony. And we'll be using our team meetings in October to do some brainstorming about specific things people might do. Next slide, please. So what's next for us? Pushing our Get Out the Vote activities. And then we'll be preparing for the next legislative session toward the end of this year, picking the areas that we're going to be focusing on. They're likely to be, again, related to Medicaid expansion, because that is still a primary need in Texas. And then we have other areas that we focused on in the past that relate to gun control and other justice issues. So that's what we're up to.
Thank you, Willie and Joyce. That's really just a helpful overview of the amazing work that you all are doing. And what, really strikes me in that, in your summary, is how it's connected to really cyclical year-round work. There's certainly a lot of attention on the church in the public square in this moment, and encouraging voting. And that's, the central topic for us today. But having that, putting that in the context of the ongoing work of the church is just, I think, very helpful and critical. And we hope that as we build, the church's work and voter engagement, election engagement this fall, that we can carry some of that momentum into the year-round pieces of advocacy that our office does and leads through the Episcopal Public Policy Network, that dioceses do, that local Episcopal organizations do at the state and local levels. So just really deeply grateful for your summary and framing there. So I'll turn to our next speaker, Canon Amy Coltis, who's canon to the Ordinary in the Diocese of Kentucky. Of course, our diocesan host for General Convention this past summer. Canon, it's great Canon Amy, it's great to have you here with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Alan. Thanks for this invitation. And I hope some of you who are listening today were here in Louisville back in June. And I hope that while you were here, maybe you heard some about this political engagement that we do in the diocese. Thank you, Alan, for making that sort of introduction. We really see it as a year-round responsibility, and really a ground-up responsibility. We're the western half of Kentucky, and so the needs from the urban center of Louisville to, a church with 3 members on the river that's really closer to Memphis than they are to Louisville, have different needs and concerns in their communities. And so a lot of our work comes from what's happening on the grounds in the communities where our parishes are. And we hear that and then try to connect people to their legislators, to nonprofit agencies that are doing that work in their communities, and to make an impact that way, and then to raise it up to the level of the General Assembly. In Louisville, we work in particular with a couple of large organizations that help us do advocacy with the General Assembly around the issues that are really important to us as Episcopalians that they also are doing. So Kentucky Refugee Ministries is one of those. I serve on their board. I'm actually chair of their board right now, that works not just in our diocese, but statewide to resettle refugees across the state. The largest number of immigrants coming to Kentucky last month were Cubans and Haitians. So that's a real timely concern for us, that we're lifting up the stories of how important people like Haitian immigrants are in our communities, and the good work that they're doing to make our communities wonderful places to live, and lifting up their gifts as we connect them to the resources through the resettlement program. We also work, the bishop has a spot on the board here with a group called Home of the Innocents that serves over 7,000 kids every year across the state of Kentucky, but based here in Louisville, providing everything from audiology appointments at a clinic to emergency foster care to lifelong residential service for kids who are medically fragile, have 24-hour nursing needs. And I wanted to sort of tell that story, the story of those two groups, not just because structurally we're connected to them, but through the on-the-ground work with them, we see how being involved in people who are doing the day-to-day work of serving the needs in our community, we see the connections that get so often lost in these big political discussions, right? So at Home of the Innocents, just one example is that I serve on their ethics committee that partners with the local children's hospital. We review ethic cases, and in that we saw there was a need for more cultural competency in that system. And because of the large number of immigrants and refugees that are ending up in the communities. And so we can connect through Kentucky Refugee Ministries then to say, where are more interpreters available? How can we bring the voices of refugees and immigrants into the system so that the people providing care have better cultural competency to understand what a family from the Congo hears when presented with certain health realities and options versus what an Anglo from the suburbs of Louisville might hear, and how can we make those connections? And if we stay in our silos and just think about these as abstract political issues, we miss the impact that they really have day to day on the people that are living in our communities. Also, those agencies allow us to focus on legislative priorities that we know will actually make a difference in the lives of real people and not just headlines on news stories. And so things like raising Medicaid rates for behavioral health services for children. And, you're talking about $1 here or there per child per day can make a huge difference. And if that gets lost in just soundbite issues, then their lives don't get changed. These are real life and death questions that we deal with. For example, through Home of the Innocents, we were able to identify the great need for, as children who are living in our medically fragile facility, convalescent facility, age out of the youth system. So when they turn 21, they have to leave that facility. And their life expectancy dramatically drops just by leaving the facility that has been their home for sometimes all of those 21 years. And so we worked with our legislative advocates, our staff, with donors to meet the right people in state government to figure out how we can solve that problem and how we can expand a facility so that if you're in our care, you can stay for your entire life and you don't have to leave when you turn 21. And that resulted in a $30 million budget line item last year in the Kentucky budget, which is an amazing success. And we know will really change the lives of children and those families who don't have another option. And so I just highlight that it really starts with on the ground work and what makes a real impact day to day. Bishop Curry, you're correct that I didn't have a Bible here in front of me on my desk, but I do have my Love Your Neighbor quote bubble that sits behind me. And that's really how Bishop White here thinks about it. And it's what we hear in each of our churches. They just connect to their neighbors. And we always tell the story of one of our small churches in Western Kentucky that a lot of you helped through emergency relief funds after the tornadoes here a few years ago. That small church with 20 people, maybe on a Sunday in a very rural area, when the bishop visits, the local principal comes and gives them the award for feeding the most number of students every year, because that little church is so committed to collecting foods and taking it over to the school that they beat out all these much bigger other denominations churches year after year, because they care about their neighbor and they've focused on that place where they can make an impact. But then we try to carry that over to the General Assembly and say, how can we address this in a more structural way? How do we fund our schools? How do we fund hunger programs? And not just let these kids try to figure it out on their own, the kids and families. So I would also say that for us, the Kentucky Council of Churches is really important. That has been a great partner to us for decades now, and includes our Roman Catholic neighbors, which is helpful because it gives us a much larger voice. We're a tiny minority as Episcopalians and as ELCA Lutherans in Kentucky. But when you add in some of these larger, some non-denominational cooperative Baptists, Roman Catholic voices, Methodist voices, we get to join in some of those issues that we all care about and are really important to all of us. And it lets us put a little more pressure than we could by ourselves. So that's an important partner for us too. And I'll just wrap up by saying that I appreciate it, Alan, you starting with also the importance on talking about having civil dialogue that does not result in political violence. In 1855, Louisville's home to one of the worst incidents of political violence in the nation's history, where 200 mostly Catholic and mostly foreign-born people were murdered on an election day because of the misinformation that spread from a really incendiary editorial in the newspaper. And that had ramifications for generations. It ran a lot of immigrants out of the city. It made it harder for them to have a healthy relationship with the government. It put a lot of shadow over religious institutions because they participated in it on both sides of that. And so we know deep in our history that that's important, and it can affect communities for a long time if you don't nip that in the bud. And so we're also attuned to being people who are advocating for how do we talk about difficult issues together and focus on really making an impact based in evidence-based practices and real information. Thank you.
And Amy, thank you for that. Really appreciate it. And just to reflect back a bit for folks in attendance, you know, the things that jump out to me in relation to voter engagement are, you know, looking at issues that really deeply impact people. You know, there's I think it's helpful to remember the generosity we should have for ourselves and others with how intense sometimes we feel around elections and around this advocacy, because these issues do really matter to people. And hopefully we can promote, you know, the Bishop Curry, the message you centered for us, right? Love for one another. If we are caring deeply about these issues, how do we then do that from that place of love? And then also, Amy, thinking of the state and local work, elections, it's a presidential election year. Certainly there's a lot of focus on the presidential race, but there are so many other races that we have the opportunity to vote in, to have a say in. And of course, our work as churches, as a nonprofit, is to be nonpartisan. We can't say who to vote for or to vote against, but there's a lot that we can do to simply encourage the vote, help people understand how to do it, why it's important, why it matters. And then the third thing that stuck out is the collaboration with other organizations, whether those are churches or secular organizations. Willie and Joyce also mentioned that as well. This isn't work that we do alone. And I want to take that to pivot to our Vote Faithfully election engagement resources. I'll put the link in the chat, but we will share that after a broadcast as well. But really, our resources are a curation of other organizations that have amazing, amazing resources to help you with voter engagement in your parish. Some of these are fairly straightforward. Some of them are more creative. Joyce, I don't take the inverse of what you said, that you had to add fun to our unfun resources by making the parish challenge. But I do think there's some great ideas there, and the parish challenge is such a wonderful model that I have seen you all lead. I don't know if there are others across the country that have tried that. but so many creative ways that churches can be involved in this work to help promote voting and participation, even for people who don't have the right to vote for one reason or another, whether it's their status in the U.S. Or their age. Maybe they're too young and they're not eligible to vote yet. But we have our Vote Faithfully Election Engagement Toolkit. We have a communications toolkit with 5 more Sundays of bulletin inserts and social media graphics that are ready to use. They're available. All of those resources are available in English and Spanish. We have our election activator program. I know Willie, I think, mentioned that there's several in your area of Texas. Joyce, the volunteering as election activators, helping to do this work at the local level. And then we also have a resource for addressing political violence. These are probably more recommended for sort of church leader. How can we prepare in advance in the event that something might happen, but are helpful for all of us to build our own awareness of how we can better address political violence if it comes up. We also have a civil discourse training and a guide on misinformation that we are working on updating again now. But I think overall, with all of these resources, please reach out to us if you all have questions. But to me, the top messages are: this is faith work. It is informed by our call as Christians. It is important, I think, in the environment we're in, to also be good examples of healthy faith-based civic engagement. We can embody that, and that can be in contrast to some of the other examples that we've seen. And then the third is to just not underestimate the importance of sharing accurate information. It may seem very basic and maybe like you're not doing enough just to put information in your bulletins through church social media, but doing that, explaining how to register, where is the best link to go, what are the dates that are specific to your state or territory. That accurate information is helpful, it's educational, but it's also helping to mitigate potential disruptions from misinformation or disinformation that might come up through the rest of this election cycle. So I'll stop there for my bit about the Office of Government Relations and hopefully turn to some of y'all's questions. Please do take advantage of the chat feature to share questions you have. I know that there were a couple about the event, the Day of Hope event, Joyce and Willie, about whether or not it's on election day, is it the day after, and then if there are considerations for the election results potentially not being available for all of the races the day after election day.
Well, we hadn't actually considered not having the results yet, so we set it to be the day after the election, assuming that we would have the results. But even if we don't, we'll be able to do a Day of Hope, I think, a day that we're going to be talking about positive things going forward. And something that Bishop Doyle has really focused hard on is that we need to be an example to the community. We need to be involved in the community. We need to be sharing. We need to be helping where we can, and kind of showing, as you said, making sure that our faith is obvious to people around us, that we are working toward the good of the community. So,
to add to that, Joyce, this Day of Hope and Week of Service came directly out of a question that was asked during the E. Reed Citizen written by, the book Citizen written by Bishop Doyle. And someone asked, they were concerned about the election. This was back in July, and they were concerned about the outcome. What if we don't get the outcome we like? And Bishop Doyle said, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We serve Jesus Christ. It doesn't matter who the president is. Our work is still the same. Mm-hmm. We need to be out. I'd love to see Episcopalians out in the community, showing love and caring for one another and being an example. And that's loosely what he said, right? Mm-hmm. Just pretty much. And H. Jan took him at his word with that and said, hey, let's do that. And so it doesn't matter if we don't have the results, because the focus is we are Christian. And regardless of who is present, that doesn't change our work. And so, let's get out and serve. So that's the focus here.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me too, Willie, I think those moments are helpful. We are hoping to repeat election night prayers that we have done the past 2 even year elections. We don't have that posted yet, but hopefully we'll have that soon, and we'll hold that moment. It's still, I think, important. And going back to the accurate information piece, continuing using our voices from our churches to reassure people that these processes are natural. It may take some time to get results back in. Certainly there was confusion in 2020 because of changes with the pandemic and increase in mail-in voting, but these are there are strong systems in place in our election systems across the country to help with this.
If I can brag on HChan, just a moment.
Sure.
One thing Joyce did not mention is I think it was voting in Texas is kind of like a moving target, okay? And we had a change, and it really was going to impact folks that were doing mail-in voting. And HChan jumped on that and worked with the League of Women Voters and others, and they educated folks all during the spring to make sure people understood how elections work here. And they did great work under the radar. And it was, I was so impressed with just how much they did so quickly.
Yep. I'm turning to another question here, and maybe Bishop Curry, start with you, but others certainly answer as well. Someone asked, can anyone speak to how to speak and preach in this election season?
Am I on?
Yes.
As crazy as it sounds, stick with the gospel. Now, let me, the parable of the Good Samaritan will help you navigate through any time. It's clear. The teachings of Jesus are, whether it's the Beatitudes, whether it's the Sermon on the Mount, all of those teachings. I heard one of the best sermons in the midst of the last fray a couple of years ago. I was actually in Texas. Executive Council was meeting in Texas, and we went to church. I think it was St. David's Church in Houston. Does that sound right? Okay.
Austin. But...
In Austin, maybe that's it. Yeah. And the sermon was right for that time. And it was biblical. It wasn't partisan. And the preacher didn't avoid hard issues, but went in them where Jesus went in them. And I just think that kind of biblical preaching that really pays attention to Jesus and what Jesus has to teach, that kind of preaching will speak in any moment, in any time, without having to get into the partisan fray. Matthew 25 is clear. It could be wrong, but last time I checked, it's pretty clear. Parable of the Good Samaritan is pretty clear. Matthew 5, 6, 7, the Sermon on the Mount is pretty clear. Like I said, Paul on a good day, he was having a good day in Corinthians. In Romans, it's clear. 1 Corinthians 12 and 13 is clear. You see what I'm saying? I'm saying William Stringfellow, who was one of a great, prophetic animates, who often said we must be biblical in our preaching, not partisan. And the more we ground it in the word, and especially in the gospel, that gospel will speak in any context, in any situation. And I used to tell folk when I was parish priest, I said, don't blame me, blame Jesus.
Any other perspectives from other panelists on helpful language, ways to use the gospel, ways to use scripture to connect to election engagement?
Alan, I would just say, although I usually have the privilege of hearing the bishop preach on Sundays because I'm often with him, but in my own life, it's often tempting to become, if not partisan, very clear on a particular issue in front of me. And what I'm always grateful for is that reflecting on the scripture for either the week or the occasion and the tradition of saints and other commemorations that we have, I'm often humbled that maybe I'm not 100% correct or 100% morally pure in my own actions. and that preaching the gospel and preaching about care of neighbor as the priority is a good accountability check for myself, that I might not have all the answers on my own, and also that I might not be practicing what I'm about ready to preach. And so I certainly can't preach a real partisan or focused message if I'm not already practicing that. So for me, that discipline also keeps me accountable to taking real actions in my life to also love my neighbor.
That makes sense. I see a question about any suggestions for inviting people into dialogue instead of defense of their position. I'm happy to just at least point to a couple of resources for that, but would love others to chime in. I think our civil discourse curriculum that I mentioned is a great place to start. We just did a couple of weeks ago a sort of introductory video about that curriculum, how to use it in your local church context. It's 5 parts, sort of multimedia. You can do it as an individual or a group. But others, Living Room Conversations, have some great topic guides. Braver Angels. There's several organizations out there that I know are folks in the church are familiar with that have some great products that can help with dialogue. So any other thoughts or suggestions on inviting people to conversation instead of just defense?
Alan, I'll say I am grateful for those resources, and I should have said this when I was talking about partners, but for those of us who are in smaller dioceses and have a lot of smaller churches and small communities, we rely on things like the materials from the Office of Government Relations, right? We don't have the resources as a diocese even, but in our individual parishes to come up with that kind of fulsome of a program. And so, how to have a conversation around Israel-Palestine. I mean, that's hard for a congregation of 8 people, but who really want to have that faithful conversation. To have those materials that your office produces, that other churches in the Episcopal Church or dioceses produce. So the generosity of sharing around that is really important to us, and lets people be connected. So they don't feel so isolated, and they don't feel like this is a futile conversation, right? Like we're part of a larger conversation and we're just playing our part in that. And so I appreciate that from places like the Diocese of Texas and from the OGR giving us opportunities to be part of a larger conversation.
Yeah. Something else to think about is whether there are interfaith groups within your area. I would guess that the Kentucky Council of Churches probably has some opportunities too for discussion. In our area, there's a group called Interfaith Action of Central Texas that has a monthly program they call the Red Bench. And at each of those, there's a topic that's being discussed in a pretty structured way around tables where you have people of different backgrounds, different opinions, and it's a nice, safe place in which people can talk with each other. So I'd recommend looking around wherever you live for some kind of interfaith group that might be a resource.
I can't resist it, but if you look over Canon Amy's shoulder, I think behind her, yeah, there's something that came out from Episcopal Migration Ministries early on. That one, it's a picture of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, a painting, comes from 1939, when the Episcopal Church resettling refugees from Europe. And the picture, it shows Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. And it says, in the name of these refugees, help all refugees. That's what I mean by that. There you go. That the tradition of our faith actually gives us the leg to stand on with integrity and without being partisan. It may have implications, but it really does. That's what I mean by biblical preaching. I don't mean preaching at folk or anything like that. But let the word speak. Let Jesus have a word. The brother actually knew some things.
Absolutely. There's sort of 3 questions. The questions are coming in, so thank you all. And I'm going to try to get them switching topics around a bit, a little more tangibly, and maybe Willie and Amy, y'all might be best suited for this, but if you have examples of parishes that have done a voter registration drive and what those experiences are like or resources they've done, Joyce, your example as well.
We have a couple of people in the congregation who are volunteer deputy registrars, VDRs. And so each time there's an election, we set up a table in the lobby at the church and between services, help people with registration. So if they have to change their address or if they're new to the area, they've moved from Kentucky or whatever, we can get them registered. And so we can go through the process with them. And as Alan pointed out, it's important to let people know the dates by which all of these things need to be done. So that's something we promote in our newsletters, our weekly newsletters at the church. And then we appear and help people with registration. We had an unfortunate, I think, incident this year in Texas in that voter rolls were purged of those who had died, which is fine, but also of a lot of other people. And so many people are worried that their registration has been canceled. And so the other thing we were doing on Sunday was having a laptop there so people could check. We've got a site where they can go and see, is their registration active? So I would say just promote it and then get VDRs to do it at a time that's convenient for the church.
Just quickly, and with a nod back to the previous question, in a former life, I was an organizer and worked with lots of churches of all denominations, worked with them to do many voter registration drives. And this is what I would suggest. One is, again, as Bishop Curry says, what does the gospel say? What does your tradition say? And when you're standing on that, you're standing on firm ground. Secondly, though, working with your pastors and key leaders to make sure that that is done in such a way that is going to help build. But also, some of the questions, and when people feel that be problematic to do this, that's getting at a deeper issue. And for those congregations, things like the book study that we did this summer around Citizen, but also just basic building relationships, because that's what it's really about. And the name calling and different things like that happens when people only see a certain part of your certain self. And we were able to successfully work with people who were very, very different, but who understood and knew each other. And we got past that level of otherness, which gets portrayed and spewed on other people doing these types of things. And so it takes a little bit more time if you're at that place where you don't think you can do it to build this, but that works over time, building those relationships of trust.
Yeah, I'll use that, Willie, to as a bridge to another question folks asked, and it's directed to you, Bishop Curry, but certainly others please answer as well. Is can someone speak to the importance of calling out white Christian nationalism? It feels urgent to bring that forward, those dangers in this time. I know that's a big topic, and Bishop Curry, you've spoken on panels just on that topic, but I wonder if we could touch on it here.
Well, I do think that there are some subjects that are not best addressed from the pulpit, because that's a one-way conversation, and that kind of thing is part of Christian formation, not to avoid it, but part of engaging in deeper ways, using our formations better, where people can be in dialogue, because the pulpit is a one-way. It's a one-way street. And so I think pedagogically, I think those kinds of issues are sometimes best teed up and engaged with some of the research that I know OGR has, that actually can help congregations engage these difficult issues. That's where you have dialogue, and dialogue will lead somewhere. And so I never engaged a partisan or that kind of thing directly from the pulpit as a parish priest, except to say, we got to talk about this. So we're going to have a group about it, talk about it, where everybody can get engaged in conversation. Ain't nobody sitting here Jesus. So since none of y'all don't look like Jesus to me, so we're going to sit down as Christians, as followers, and see how we can work with this and invite people to the table for conversation and use the resources. I mean, OGR really does have great, especially on Christian nationalism and white Christian nationalism. There are the Joint Baptist Committee have excellent resources that really already have designs and all that kind of stuff that you can use, and that really do work.
Yeah, Bishop Curry, thank you for mentioning the Baptist Joint Committee and their Christians Against Christian Nationalism resource that they organized. I know we were one of the initial organizations that were part of that, and it's a great. They have an educational curriculum, I believe, in addition to kind of the pledge. But it gets at what you're talking about of doing this in conversation rather than just from the pulpit. So I appreciate that. That is where I would turn people as well, is to that resource. I also think from a strategic point of view in this moment, we are wanting to lead with sort of as a response to the Christian nationalism narrative, or perhaps in acknowledging that it is there, we are wanting to focus on the positive message of healthy faith-based civic engagement. What does that look like? Can we embody it? How is this actually done well? Because it's something we want to, we believe in, we think the church should be doing, we are doing it well. Can we continue to amplify that, not just for the work that can be done, but the message that's embodied in practicing in that way and engaging in the public square in that way, as a means of countering, Christian nationalism rhetoric and narratives that are out there, and that I know folks across the country are hearing in particular ways.
I saw someone about that resource, the Joint Baptist Committee. What the title of it? Somebody was asking.
Oh, it's Christians Against Christian Nationalism.
That's it.
Yep. That should get you there.
That'll get you there. Yeah.
Let's see. Someone had asked as well, what do we do when we encounter folks, including church leadership, who've rejected the premise of voting faithfully, and that they're not supportive of doing this in the church context. Any advice for overcoming or navigating, having a conversation with that perspective?
I think it goes back to the things we've said here, which is just having an honest conversation with each other, even if that's with the leadership, and just saying, this is not an attempt to be divisive or to push a particular agenda. It's how do I live my faith more authentically in the world so that my neighbor knows who Jesus is, because I live out my life the way Jesus is saying I should live out my life. And that means to care about my neighbors in these varieties of issues that are coming up that in our system get funded, get demonized, sometimes get dismantled through political actions. And we have the right to vote to make sure that doesn't happen, so that our neighbors get the care that they need. And that's the only way we can do that, through our system. Should we also be working as the church to address those issues? Yes. I would wonder if there's really a culture of we don't talk about anything that could at all be perceived as political. Maybe bringing those issues to leadership in a way that you can work on the ground with them, partnering with a social service organization, another nonprofit who does that work to address that issue. And over time, you might see ways that the political engagement really does impact that work and really does need to be done. And that most of that, I think I said this to you, Alan, when we were preparing, we find on the ground, most of that ends up being very bipartisan. Even on some really hot button headline issues, on the ground, when you're talking about why this is so important or feels urgent, it's because there is a real need that most people recognize. And even in different approaches, we can come up with ways that make sense for us as a community to take steps to fund differently or structure differently or give people, restore rights to people, things like that. And so doing that work on the ground, I think, would be an entryway that leads into political action, or at least conversation down the road.
Absolutely. I really want to echo that. In my 30 years of organizing with people on the ground, when you talk to people face to face, the differences aren't as vast as they seem to be, truly. But these things get politicized. But people can figure stuff out if we have the conversations. It's when we don't have the conversations, that's when the problems come.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it can be one straightforward point that's helpful is to help folks separate partisan and political as two different concepts. We mix them together, interchange them in ways that aren't accurate. That happens on social media and news. Like, it happens that we switch those out and we really mean something different. And so being political is helping to problem solve together. We have church politics, as our outreach committees determine church budgets, and on is this group decision making. And I think separating that from the party politics or partisanship is critical, not just from the legal perspective that we mentioned, but for this very reason. And I think too, Willie, all of you have mentioned the importance of relationship. And I think the work that we may not think of it this way, the year-round work of trying to build relationships with other organizations in our communities, it helps to support this. It helps us to see and understand that the issues that we're discussing in an election season throughout the year in our advocacy, they matter to someone. It may not matter to everyone equally. What's impacting you may not be the same thing that's impacting someone else. But trying to be open about that and having a conversation about what is something that matters to you and how might that actually move you to be more engaged politically. That can be a bridge for helping people to understand what you care about and why you're wanting to engage politically on the topic that you care about. We have just a couple of minutes here. We've covered a lot of ground. I'm just so grateful for the wisdom and expertise that you all have shared, from big theoretical topics to the Bible and theology to specifics of voter engagement. I'd love to go around if you all have just a quick message to wrap up with what you're looking forward to in this election cycle. Willie, we'll start with you and Joyce.
Oh, I just say, I love the church. I believe in the work of the church so much. And this is a space that should not be ceded. The love of Jesus Christ, the care for everyone, particularly the other, needs to be paramount in all our decision making. And we're the only folks that have it as our mission to care for all families, all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd say it's time to express our Christian values and encourage those in other people, and be able to demonstrate that in ways like our week of service, but also just individually as we're working with people. Make sure that we understand and share with each other our shared values. I think that's at the base of what Amy was talking about. When you get down to the nitty-gritty and talk with the individual humans, we all have many of the same shared values. So let's feature those.
And Amy.
Yeah, I'm always impressed every election cycle how engaged Episcopalians already are around a lot of issues. And often when we do some digging, there's already someone who's Episcopalian working on it somewhere in our diocese or in the other diocese across the state. And I think that's because it's been such a culture through the Office of Government Relations, through the presiding bishop's preaching, of connecting what Jesus says to how we live out our daily lives. And so I'm grateful to be part of a tradition that lifts up how important that work can be in impacting our communities.
Thank you. And Bishop Curry, what are you looking forward to? You're muted.
I think that was God telling me to stay muted. But anyway, that was I can't add anything more to Willie and Joyce and Amy, except to say this is the gospel's work. And thank God for you and for folk throughout this church who are doing it and doing it in a spirit of love. So thank you.
Yep. Thank you all. And thank you, Joe and the Episcopal Parish Network for this platform. I'll take care.